Today's guest is Kassidy Arena, Nebraska Public Media's senior reporter based in Lincoln. Previously, she reported extensively for Iowa Public Radio and KBIA in mid-Missouri. Since earning a journalism degree from the University of Missouri-Columbia in journalism, radio reporting, and producing, she has earned recognition as a rising star in public media and has had her work on NPR's Morning Edition, Here and Now, and PRX's The World and Beyond. Her recent piece, Nebraska Keeps Ban on Food Assistance for Those with Drug Convictions, explores the personal and policy impacts of the state's lifetime SNAP and food stamp ban. Kassidy highlights the stories of people who re-entered society only to face homelessness and hunger, and provides insight into why Nebraska remains one of only 2 states still enforcing this strict prohibition. So I hope you enjoy this episode of The Poisoning. Kassidy, welcome to The Poisoning Podcast.
Thanks for having me.
Oh, I'm so happy that I tracked you down. It took a little sleuthing to get your number, but I did it. I even asked one of my local public radio friends. I was like, can you find her phone number, please?
We're all kind of connected. You can find a public radio person if you try hard enough.
And it's interesting because I wish I could claim I go to the gym 5 days a week. I do not. But the 2 or 3 times I go, I listen to West Virginia Public Radio on my drive to and from the gym. And on my way back from the gym last week, was it last week? I heard your story, which just really fascinated me. And I would have never heard this story from Nebraska. So here we are this week, and I am just completely fascinated, and this podcast is about illicit drug use, how our society treats it, what is going on in Nebraska, and why people challenged the SNAP regulations that are currently on the books there.
So that's one of the reasons why I love public radio is it does connect us even though we're miles and miles apart. And this story was actually super local to Nebraska, but it was kind of a story that can really resonate with people all over the country, all over the world, even though the laws were obviously very specific to our state here in the center of the country. It's still a story that can really open people's eyes about how different states handle drug felonies and SNAP, or, as people know, supplemental nutritional assistance program. And so in Nebraska, how it has worked for years, people who have drug-related felonies on their records do not and will not ever, they have a lifetime ban on accessing those SNAP benefits. So that food access, the government-assisted food access, is banned for life for them. And really recently, our legislature tried to change that. They were actually successful, if you think about it. Lawmakers voted yes. They passed this bill that would end that lifetime ban. And the governor vetoed that. Come back to the legislature, as we all know from our Schoolhouse Rock days, goes back to the legislature to see if it will override, and it failed to override. So basically, we're back where we started. We're the exact same as we've always been. There is still and currently a lifetime ban on people with drug-related felonies, and we can dive into exactly what those drug-related felonies have to look like to get that lifetime ban.
Well, let's do that. What does it take to get a lifetime ban with a drug felony? Like, what would I have to do if I was in Nebraska to be guilty of
if
this?
you were in Nebraska. So we kind of look at it, we as Nebraskans and our government kind of looks at it in a twofold way. So there's the distribution side of things, and then there's let's say the user side of things.
Okay.
So for an individual who is using illicit drugs, when we're talking about all those scheduled drugs, when they're kind of using those more illegal drugs, they get 3 tries, basically. Like, remember the 3 strikes rule? We're not talking baseball though, but we're talking drug related felonies. So if you've used 3 times, you're caught every time. That's when that ban comes into effect, is after that third strike. Now, if you have the intent to distribute or are found guilty of the intent to distribute, that's where you only get that 1 strike. That's it. You have the lifetime ban after you're convicted of that felony.
Wow. That's interesting because, especially with synthetic opioids, it is so hard to be sober. And it takes people
Yes.
many times to defeat opioid use syndrome.
Yes, yes. And sometimes, there's that overlap. You can
Hmm.
be caught with the intent to distribute, but you yourself are also a user. So, it's not
Wow.
as black and white. I'm sure that there are, places where it overlaps. But the
Sure.
law as it is now is written in a pretty black and white way.
And can you explain how the background, do you know about the background of the federal law from the 90s that started all of this?
I know a little bit. So,
Okay.
there is a federal kind of rule right now that there is a ban on SNAP benefits for drug-related felonies. States can opt out of that. So, when you see a state saying they have opted out of the federal ban, that means that they've decided to go their own way and they can say either, we actually don't want to have that ban, or we want to nip and tweak that law for our state. The only state that has the full federal ban is South Carolina. They're kind of the island
Mm.
in the sea of the SNAP bans. The majority of states, I think it's 27. So 27 states have opted out of that federal ban.
Okay.
22 states have voted to modify that ban. Nebraska is one of the states that has what would be considered a modification of the SNAP ban for people with drug related felonies.
Ah, yes, here in West Virginia, I believe it was 2018 where we modified it to, I think it's murder, like you had to be a felony murder, and a few other very high bars. Is there any other law on the books in Nebraska that would ban you for life from SNAP? Like, let's say you were convicted for rape several
Mhm,
times. Would
mhm.
that ban you from SNAP for life?
Nope. The only law that the SNAP ban pertains to is drug related felonies in that 3 strike, 1 strike scenario. So if you are convicted of a different crime, a different felony, and you're released, you do have access to SNAP then.
Fascinating. And no one, has this been pointed out in the
It has
debate?
been. It
Mhm.
has been pointed out. So hopefully I'm not messing with us. I'm pulling up some
Okay.
statistics here. So yeah, so it has been noticed, and people kind of, especially the people who are directly impacted by this law, kind of say, well, what about, this person? What about this guy over here? What about
Right.
this person? And so it really is kind of the one of the people that I talked to said it's pretty devastating to see that she is treated in a different way because she was convicted of a drug related felony. And then, as far as if I may go quickly back to the
Mhm.
modifications, one expert I spoke with who works with um, I will find, let me pull it back up because it went away. One person that I worked with that I talked to for this story is kind of an expert in SNAP benefits. So her name is Gina. Her name is Gina Platanino, and she works for the Food Research and Action Center. And she said that these modifications, at least the one that Nebraska has employed, really isn't that much of a modification.
Oh,
It's still really hard to get that SNAP access. So, although we use the term modification, it's not really what people would think in terms of like a yoga modification when you can do a different, form of your body and it feels better. It's essentially really similar to that federal ban.
okay. So what led the legislature? What is there a turning point, a defining moment that led the legislature to try to end this lifetime ban?
So this is not the first time that a bill such as this one has been introduced. It's been introduced in the past, didn't really get enough traction in the nonpartisan Nebraska legislature. So Nebraska, all of our lawmakers are nonpartisan. We
Oh,
have a unicameral.
I knew the
So we all,
unicameral, but I did
yeah.
not know they were nonpartisan.
Yes, yes. So
Really?
when you're voting in
Oh,
Nebraska for state lawmakers, it's nonpartisan. And so it never really got traction. So eventually, the
okay.
person who, the lawmaker, Senator Megan Hunt, who was introducing this bill, said, maybe let's try somebody else. Let's have a different introducer of this bill. So we got the legislature introduced it under Senator Roundtree. And that's where it started to get some attention. So I have the numbers here. So when it first went through, when it first passed, 32 members voted yes, 17 members voted no. So it is a little hard to break that down on party lines because, as you know,
Ah,
nonpartisan has no parties. But that's when then it went to our Republican governor. We do have a Republican governor, Jim Pillen. He vetoed it, as I mentioned. And then on that second vote, that's when they failed to get the number. So there were six lawmakers who had originally voted yes,
and then
but
strike.
then didn't want to override the governor's veto.
And would you say that they typically go with the governor, those six?
I can say that the Nebraska legislature is relatively leaning toward Republican, even though they don't have that R next to their name. We do have a majority Republican legislature.
So let's talk about some of the stories of the folks you've interviewed. Can you tell us about the people you talked to who the ban has affected?
I spoke to people from all backgrounds. They look different, they sound different. They're from all different geographic locations in
Hmm.
Nebraska. One woman I was talking to in rural Scottsbluff, Nebraska, so all the way in the west side of our state, one of her first words were, I don't look like a drug felon, do I? You
Hmm.
know, she's very diminutive in nature. She's wearing a purple sweater. She's glasses, a little brunette bob. And she goes, I don't look like what you would think, do you? You know, and I was like, I guess that's a question I have back at you. And she goes, yeah, I always ask people, what does a drug felon look like? Because, look at me, I have a record and I don't necessarily look like a stereotype. So I spoke with her. Her name was Sarah Truck, and she actually worked for a while to help reintroduce folks to society from incarceration. So she kind of gave back. I talked with a mom who has way back during her teen years had a drug related felony on her record,
Hmm.
now is a mother of two, and she does not have access to SNAP benefits, although her children would. I spoke with a man who he finished his time and he's based in Lincoln, of a Hispanic background. I spoke to a man of a Black background. So drug related felonies, as we all should know, is not specific to a race. It's not specific to a sex or a gender. So the SNAP ban does not affect just one type of person, rather people from all different backgrounds and all different life experiences.
Yeah. Would you would you like to read a little bit from one of your pieces? Because I think some of the quotes are good. Maybe about
Sure.
Derek.
Sure. So Derek is a gentleman I met through Facebook.
Hmm.
The way I found this is, I was following the law and posts about the law, and Derek was pretty vocal on social media saying, this impacts people negatively. This impacts people like me, and I can't get food. Now, Derek, when he was released from incarceration in 2012, he actually experienced homelessness and hunger for about 6 months before he could really get on his feet. When you're released in Nebraska, you get, released with what you have on, and you get $100. That's what he said. And that didn't really last him for very long. So he said, one of his quotes that really stands out is, I felt frustrated and disappointed that, hey, when you serve your time, when you get out, you're just like, okay, why am I being punished more for something I've already paid my dues for? that's one of the quotes that he said. And he talked a lot to me about what it was like to experience hunger and what it was like to experience trying to stretch, a bunch of bananas that can last him longer, so that he doesn't, go to bed hungry.
Yeah, that really stood out to me when I was listening to the story on the radio in the car. And I wasn't listening as closely because, like, 2 nights later, I woke up. I was like, I have to find this Cassidy and we have to talk about this piece. But I also thought, like, I need to buy a bunch of grocery store gift cards and make sure the people who have them need them. Now, you were obvious, because I thought maybe Derek was experiencing this currently, but this was past in his life. I mean, that's how moving it was to me because of the stigma that some of um, former drug offenders have on them. And it's hard. I've had a guest previously on the show. He's a former heroin addict. He was arrested. It took him many, many times to get into recovery. And now he's running a report center in the county next to me in West Virginia. And they have a nonprofit arm now that they started because people who go through the program of being arrested, then getting clean and into recovery, okay, so then they get hired, but they don't have the money necessarily for the boots they need for the job, or their health insurance lapses because they've just got the job, but it doesn't cover the medication they're currently on. It won't kick in for a month. So these people, when they aren't working, how do they afford things? And we really have to think, in my opinion, if we're trying to get people to be sober, in recovery, part of society, how do we help them do that? And I don't know that this law does.
Some experts I spoke to, including the people that were personally impacted,
Hmm.
talked a lot about that recidivism, that
Yes.
concept of in being incarcerated, coming out, and then being incarcerated again. Now, that same expert that I spoke with, Gina, with the Food Research
Hmm.
and Action Center, said it actually increases recidivism to limit food access to people who need food. With the logic kind of being that she explained, kind of being, that Robin Hood idea. If you're hungry, you're more likely to steal an apple if you don't have the money, or you're more likely to steal a loaf of bread if you don't have the money for it. So that's what her kind of thinking was. If you're hungry, you're more likely to steal that apple or steal that loaf of bread, which is a crime to steal. So she was talking about how that cycle of the lack of food access isn't really helpful with reducing recidivism.
And the state has only seen an increase, right, in recidivism. Is that correct?
So since 2008, the state saw a 15% increase in recidivism. So even though Nebraska adopted what is called Reentry 2030 goals, which is kind of this national collaborative to reduce prison reentry rates, aka recidivism, by the year 2030, it hasn't yet worked, at least comparatively, from that 2008 number to this. I believe those numbers were 2023. So have not seen that decrease in recidivism.
Hmm. So there's a state senator, was it Koth? Am I saying this right? Koth?
Kauth.
Kauth.
It's
Thank
a
you.
tough last
Kauth.
name. Yep.
Um, she justified keeping the ban
Hmm.
by saying choices have consequences and deterrence matters. How do proponents of the repeal respond to that senator's logic?
So Senator Kalp's logic is kind of talking about using this ban as a motivational tool. So saying, don't commit these crimes because if you do, look at what happens. There are, like she said, there are consequences to actions or to choices. Now, proponents, including the Senator Hunt, who
Hmm.
originally had introduced this bill a few times, says back, drug use is not necessarily a choice all the time. Same with the folks that I spoke with who have the life experiences. It's not always a choice. Or sometimes, you know what, you just got caught up in the wrong crowd because you were 19 years old.
Right.
Or your significant other decided to make a choice and you own the home together. So then you're kind
Mm.
of brought into that as well, which is what happened to one other person I spoke with. Or it is just a fact of I made a wrong choice. And one gentleman I spoke to says, absolutely, I made a wrong choice. But, now I'm better and I would never want my children to make that choice. So, there are, a few different opinions of how this can work out, and what's good and what's bad.
Yeah, no, it's a complicated problem, and complicated problems have complicated solutions.
Exactly.
So this has been in effect since the 90s.
Mhm.
As a deterrence to drug use, is it working in Nebraska? Has Nebraska seen like a drop in drug use, a drop in drug arrests or
That
convictions?
that is a great question, and I wish I knew the answer
Oh,
to that. I wish I knew so that I could provide it, and it would have been a
okay.
great aspect to use in the story. Unfortunately, I don't know it off the top of my head.
Maybe I'll try to get to that for this weekend's newsletter and see what we can find online. Yeah, I was just, if it is the deterrence, I would think there would be some statistical numbers since it's been in place since the 90s. We've
I'm
had
sure,
enough, there
yes.
should be enough data to look at.
Yeah, yeah. This story was really data heavy because, like I was saying, with those modifications, I had the help of two of our student interns, Macy Byers and Andres Lopez. A little shout out for them. They helped me create this whole graph of what each state does and how each state has interpreted the
Yeah.
modifications. And gosh, there is a lot to dig through. This is not an issue that is one and done with this story, nor should it be an
Sure.
issue that's one and done for the rest of the country. Definitely take a look at what your state does and see kind of how your state interprets either opting out, opting in, modifying uh, this SNAP ban, and it's different for all states.
Yeah, that is for sure. Now, how are local service providers or reentry programs responding to this ban? Do they have to expand their services? Doing anything to mitigate the ban?
I wouldn't say there are a whole ton that I know of off the top of my head, but I will say I focus a lot on the individual stories.
Okay.
So, for instance, Derek, who had experienced hunger himself, he now has a little catering business that he helps out his friends and family who are hungry and who maybe can't afford, or, extra meals are a little bit hard on the wallet. Now he gives back and cooks for them and makes food en masse. When I was with him, when he was cooking in his kitchen, these massive portions of enchiladas, he's like talking like it's a cooking show. He does not want to use any store-bought sauces. He makes them from scratch so that he can
Mhm.
try to make his impact on the community, no matter how small it can be, or no matter how small it seems to be. But I mean, when we're talking about the further education on SNAP. So I will say right
Mhm.
now, it's not
Yeah.
really known. People don't super know, or I guess a lot of people may not know that people with drug related felonies don't get access to SNAP. But we're almost seeing a pullback of the programs that work to educate about SNAP. So very, very recently, in fact, just yesterday, which was July 24th, we heard news that one of the Nebraska programs that offers SNAP education to folks, because yes, it's
Mhm.
hard to navigate if you don't know how to kind of work the system. The funding for that has been cut. So that program no longer exists because they were receiving federal funding. So we're kind of seeing, I guess, at least for that program, it's no longer a thing, or won't be a thing at the end of September.
Do you do you think how should I say this? Do you think the average Nebraska voter even paid attention to this?
I'm going to go back to what Senator Hunt was telling me, and that she said,
Hmm.
you know what, I really don't think people understand
Yeah.
the bill. they don't understand what it really is. Because when the governor signed the veto saying that, we're not going to end the lifetime ban, he said, quote, that individuals who distribute drugs should not be entitled to taxpayer-funded benefits. Now, people may see that and may agree or disagree, but Senator Hunt is saying that's not exactly what the bill is doing. The bill does a lot more, or the bill kind of does that, but it does it through this lens instead. So she's saying that it's not necessarily that Nebraskans or even the senators who voted against this are against allowing SNAP benefits. Her argument is more, I'm not sure if people fully understand. Because I don't know about you, but even navigating taxes for me is sometimes complicated. So, it can be a lot to try to get all the nitty-gritty details from all of these government programs.
I had to have someone help me like with my car like sticker. I don't even the renewal.
Right.
I was like, I
Hey, it's
cannot
hard.
understand this form. This is form written in a different language.
Yes. And then, and the second you do one thing wrong, then it shuts off another thing. So yeah, it can be a little complicated to understand.
So I always our addiction problem here in America causes so many different things in society, but reading like being dropped off with $100 after you're released from doing your time reminded me of our foster care issues here, which are heavily drug and addiction related in West Virginia. When someone graduates out of foster care, they're taken back to their home area and dropped off with very little resources. And then we wonder why these young people may fall into addiction or do not succeed. So hearing this just made me think about it because I was at one of our foster care agencies in West Virginia a few weeks ago, learning about what they offer and what young people go through. So
and that's just another example that this story doesn't end here. There's a bunch of little, like the roots of a tree. There's a bunch of impacts all throughout communities.
It really is. Now, do you think this bill may resurface next year? What's the word on the street?
Well, the word on the street, aka the Nebraska Capitol, is to some people maybe the same, is that they're going to keep trying. So I kind of ended the story with the senators like Senator Hunt, who have continued to push for this bill, do think it's going to pass. I mean, like, she was right in that it did pass, for a little bit. So, it just kind of depends on, I think she, when I was talking with her doing my fact checking, she just kind of clarified and she was like, it just has to take the right people. It's just like that one right person or those few right people. And so she fully believes that this will one day, be changed in Nebraska.
Well, let's hope it is. Would you like to share where people can read your work, Kassidy?
Oh gosh, a self plug. Yes, you can find my work at Nebraska Public Media or like Erin found it on National Public Radio, NPR, and we're available digitally and on the radio. So if you're not a radio kind of person, then you can find us digitally as well.
Well, I encourage you. I hope you keep covering addiction in your state. It's a topic that is a big problem in every state, all 50. So thank you for coming on the Poisoning Podcast, Kassidy.